Okay, so I think I have 15 minutes here, so let me just jump to it by saying cities are an absolute mess. But over the last half century, or actually after the last whole century, most of the world has ended up in cities. And my one-word summary of our response to that problem would be dense. Every 20 years or so, a new master plan will emerge for urban growth. And it really just emerges to replace the last failed master plan that we came up with 20 years earlier. Little known fact, urban density actually peaked in 1894 and has been on a 1 or 2% decline ever since. Growth, of course, has not, as we can see by watching Sao Paulo expand at quite a rate over the last 130 years. Le Corbusier, the creepy fellow in the back there, he represents, in my point of view, the spirit of our failures that have happened on that 20-year cadence, the causes of which I think can be assigned to three broad categories. First one being hubris. This arrogance that planning cities is actually just as easy as moving objects around on a breakfast table, which you can see epitomized in this drawing in the background. That's Le Corbusier's plan to quarter Sao Paulo with two massive viaducts. That was his idea about how he was going to modernize them and improve the quality of life. The next category would be expulsions, which kind of lead from our naive approach to city planning, as we failed to provide fair access to information and resources. And then that, of course, foments a little bit of isolation, that we end up with lowering social cohesion and far poorer neighborhood resilience. But I'm going to explore this in two parts. Later, I'm going to look forward, or kind of look outwards to how things are right now. First, though, I'd like to look at these concepts of hubris, expulsion, and isolation as they played out over the last 50 years, starting in 1964 in Vancouver.
Built on the shores of Burrard Inlet, the city has one of the finest natural harbors in the world, and its magnificent setting inspired Captain Vancouver to observe, to render it a most lovely land requires only the industry and ingenuity of man. Except for a tragic fire which destroyed most of the city. Like other Canadian cities, Vancouver is a vigorous social and industrial complex which must adapt to the constantly changing pressures of population and growth. New and larger industrial plants, hospitals, apartments, and offices make Vancouver's ever-changing skyline a symbol of its civic progress. Blight is death to a city. And these dwellings, built with such hope and care at the turn of the century, are dying board by board, and the property they occupy dies with them. Nothing happens except dilapidation and decay gets worse each year. Property values fall, and blight is the result. What does this condition mean to a city in terms of its physical and human resources, its health and crime rate? What does it cost to police this area, to provide social assistance, fire protection, and water? Are sufficient taxes collected from this area to pay for these services? How is this worn-out area to be renewed? The answers to these and many other questions were not known, but it was clear that unless positive action was taken, the problem of blight would never be solved. To measure the extent of the decay, the city planners considered three primary factors. First, age of dwelling. Second, quality of housing, as shown by its exterior condition. And third, existing land use. To determine the quality of housing, specially trained personnel appraised it by making an external survey. This provided information on structural condition and likely deterioration over the next 20 years. The survey revealed that the distribution of blight was most prevalent in the areas containing the oldest housing. To measure the social factors, a second survey was conducted by making an internal inspection of every fourth house within the blighted area. 15% of the houses were overcrowded. 20% of the dwellings lack adequate means of heating.
I just plugged in the heater and the room was full of flames.
10% had no bath. 17% of the toilets were shared by 6 or more persons. 10% had cold water only. As the internal survey continued, the tragedy of decay and its economic and social impact was firmly established. 2 areas were selected for immediate attention. And in the largest of these, Vancouver's redevelopment program was set in motion. Stage 1 of the plan called for construction of a high-rise apartment and a group of maisonettes on the McLean Park grounds. These buildings will provide a bank of housing for people who live in the adjacent blocks of older dwellings marked for future demolition. As soon as a block is cleared of blighted buildings, more apartments and maisonettes will be constructed, thereby keeping the supply of housing ahead of the needs created by demolition and land clearance. Through the continued acquisition of land, plus private and public construction, the redevelopment program will be repeated block by block until the entire district becomes a healthy and economically stable part of the city. New parks, schools, industrial, commercial, and residential buildings will add their measure of beauty and strength to Vancouver through the planned demolition of the old. To ensure an ample supply of housing for the families concerned, a second public housing project, Skeena Terrace, was started outside the redevelopment area. Its purpose was to augment McLean Park by providing low rental housing for Vancouver citizens and to absorb any overflow from the land clearance program. The problem of blight cannot be solved by civic governments alone. It requires the sustained interest, cooperation, and encouragement of all citizens. Without this support, Vancouver could not have initiated a plan to renew its aging districts or build modern housing. The pressures of population, the demands of expanding industry, and the ravages of time create difficult and perplexing problems for all civic governments. But with confidence, Vancouver has accepted the challenge, knowing that to build a better city requires only the industry and ingenuity of man.
Feel safe?
Not really. No, I'm always, you watch your back, you have to when you're little kids.
The Robert Taylor Homes, a huge Chicago housing project along the Dan Ryan Expressway, is home for thousands of people and a number of major gangs. The lines are carefully drawn, with many of the buildings literally controlled by the resident street gangs. One occupant who has lived here for 19 years raised 6 boys in the project. Her 7th was killed here.
I'm arrested here. And I'm afraid my son even goes to school. No.
These red bills fathers back here, we call the homes. And the homes, our type bills that you would not want to go in. They have a reputation of being so bad, they don't care about anything.
That is very intense. CHA projects throughout the city.
Ernie DiBenedetto heads up the gang prosecution unit of the state's attorney's office.
Over the last several years, we've been averaging in the area of 70 gang homicides per year. And that is very, very serious. And that doesn't count the numerous incidences of shootings where somebody's seriously injured, robberies, burglaries, narcotics trafficking, which gangs thrive on. So we do have a very serious problem.
It's not a good outlook. There's very few gang members that really get out and go straight.
I think they should try to understand them because there's purpose to gangbangs. It's not all that bad.
You have to take a whole new approach about gangs itself. A whole different approach.
I belong.
I don't know why the rest of that development plan that you saw didn't actually get carried through in Vancouver. But we sort of dodged a bullet, it would seem, because it really didn't work out well at all anywhere else. And a lot of cities in North America are struggling to recover from what they did in terms of that massive, broad approach to trying to solve the problem of urban blight. So that was the last 50 to 100 years, kind of in a nutshell. Looking forward, things are sort of even more uncertain, actually. As Bruce Sterling says, we're now in this mode of dark euphoria where things are just sort of falling apart. Anything is possible, but you never realize that you're going to have to dread it so much. His urban prognosis is old people in big cities afraid of the sky. Old, because life expectancy is increasing. We've gained about 20 years in the last 50 years. That rapid aging, demographically speaking, is happening at an even quicker rate in Canada. Big, because although we're starting to level off in North America, the rest of the developing world, or North America and Europe, the developing world is still catching up to us in a large, really quickly in terms of urban population. And then afraid of the sky because climate change is a clear and present danger. C40 here notes that almost 90% of our urban areas are coastal. In fact, at the moment, 6.5 million people in Bangladesh have already been affected by climate change on coastal fronts. In Vancouver, of course, expecting a meter rise in the next 80 years, that problem is pretty real for us as well. So how do we intend to carry forward and solve these problems? Surely with the same hubris that got us into this mess in the first place. Only now we have artificial intelligence and big data analysis, otherwise the predictive city, as Dan Hill would call it. This is powering a $400 billion a year smart cities industry. And Adam Greenfield introduces us to the poster child of the kind of the brownfield smart city, Rio, with its intelligent command center that gives decision makers consolidated information to help them anticipate problems. This, of course, looks eerily similar to the command center that we just saw pictured in the scenes from the Dread trailer that I cut into that inaudible video. What this says to me is that we're already living in this sci-fi dystopian future where big data analysis answers questions such as how many troops are needed on which street for a favela pacification operation. And it's not that this is some remote event that is happening only outside of North America. It's all over the cities that you are familiar with. In Boston, they're using surveillance cameras to recognize these concert goers and passerbys as well, based on their skin color, clothes, and facial features. Cities also have ears. There's a company called ShotSpotter that's listening in many major cities, Rio being one of them, promising to fight violent gun crimes. But of course, when you're listening throughout the whole city to try and triangulate gunfire, you also end up picking up a lot of other information as well. And all of this ends up culminating in this concept of predictive policing. So this is yet another private company hoping to identify, in this case, places and times that future crimes are most likely to occur. But all this surveillance isn't just for security. You can also use it for measuring traffic flows as well. This is a company called PlaceMeter. It's a New York-based startup that pays you, the citizen, $50 a month to suction cup your smartphone to a wall so that it can see the streetscape outside of your window. And it lets them measure, identify individual pieces of traffic. And you can kind of see, resolution is kind of poor, but they know how many people are inside this building based on who's gone in and then who's come back out. Now, in New York, there was a similar kind of technology that, unbeknownst to most people, was rolled out in all of the phone booths. This company called Titan, I believe, ended up placing Bluetooth beacons in all of these phone booths in the city. And when residents caught wind of it, they kind of fought back and said, hey, who's providing oversight? Who owns this data? And actually, like, who said that this was okay for you to let somebody just come in and track our location around the city? However, in Chicago, you have the civic government themselves rolling out a programming like this. They're putting these sensors all throughout the city to capture telemetry about climate and all the rest of it. One of the things that it does watch is it will sample cell phone data to try and monitor pedestrian traffic throughout the city. And I don't think that they've had very much blowback, which suggests that people are a little bit more willing to trust a benign and somewhat boring institution like civic government. And not necessarily for any really good reason, because as Anthony Townsend points out, it's not hard to imagine somebody's brother getting access to something that they're not supposed to have because of some kind of really corrupt relationship. These are the difficult dynamics modern cities are trying to contend with. If you're going to have some kind of sweeping approach to solving these problems, you need to have as close to real-time measurement as possible so that we avoid that 20-year cycle of sort of boom-bust in planning ideas. But on the other hand, there's so little in terms of well-established precedent on how to do so responsibly. There's groups like the Global Parliament of Mayors who have identified that maybe one significant problem is that there's no standards associated with how cities should be governed. But Adam Greenfield is quick to point out that the concept of using an ISO standard for governance is like really bizarre. Unfortunately, in May, or maybe not unfortunately, but in May there actually was an ISO standard for at the very least measuring the health of cities that was passed. So there you have it, the hubris of present-day urban planning, shitty metrics, surveillance of everything, one-size-fits-all policy, and naively trusting algorithms. So that's not very good, but what about these expulsions? So for this, kind of need to broaden our lens a little bit and look at the urban impact of global finance. Starting in 1973, and people can correct me after, but in Chicago, derivatives were legalized, which kind of gave birth to new instruments of modern global finance. This, in broad strokes, has led to predatory formations of elite actors and systemic financial capacities that allow wealth to accrete in large amounts within a small group of people. And then this results in a kind of savage sorting where the haves leverage their wealth and influence to gate themselves off from the rest of the world, and the have-nots, of course, end up on the other side of those gates. These are at least the ideas Saskia Sassen has put forth in her most recent book called Expulsions. She notes that even though global GDP, an often referred to metric of the health of a city or a nation, even though that's risen, this alternative metric called the Genuine Progress Indicator, which measures I think, 26 diverse aspects, peaked in 1978 and has kind of wavered for the last little while, suggesting that all the bad stuff has really outpaced this growth of wealth. And so you can see, actually, income, at least, and wealth graphs look the same. The really rich people are at about the same percentage of the wealth that they had for income it kind of peaks somewhere in the 30s, but for wealth it's closer back to their pre-World War I levels. And what's even more interesting is if you zoom in on this, the 1% actually has a 1%. So if you're rich and you're in the 1%, you're probably saying, damn, those 0.01% that have really started to command a heck of a lot of the wealth. Those are the people that are in like the $1 billion plus category. And what's interesting about them is that they want to manage their wealth through a specific type of land acquisition and real estate purchase. So super prime real estate is what they're interested in, and in a place called hedge cities. So this guy runs a blog called The Sovereign Investor, describes hedge cities as basically stable countries where wealthy folks from unstable countries will drive luxury real estate prices. That's appealing to those super wealthy because those super prime properties weather the financial markets really well. And you can actually watch this. If you look at the country's political risk indicator, if it wavers, then real estate investment from people in that country in hedge cities will go up by about 0.5%. The downside of this, of course, for people of local and modest means is that this kind of is one of the factors that help spike all real estate values. It's not just the super, super rich, though. There's a bit of a generational pressure that exists on real estate as well. So here you can see the incumbent baby boomers had a much easier time wading into the real estate market, and that with every subsequent generation, that ease diminished. The interesting thing about that is that people who end up holding wealth in a city tend to be the ones that go, oh wait, if we increase density, my property value is going to go down. Maybe I should say no to this. That's aside from the fact that we don't really know whether or not increasing density does anything, or at least that's debatable. So the other interesting thing is looking outside of cities. You see those uber-rich and large private companies, as well as some nation-states, buying up vast tracts of non-urban land, mostly so that they can grow biofuels to power eco-density, and also to speculate on food prices, which tend to go up. But the thing to note about this is that that really results in displacement of rural populations, and then that rural displacement ends up actually driving a lot of this urban population growth in developing countries, like China. Happens a lot in Africa and South America as well, but in China, one of the interesting things they do is they try and manage this influx of new rural migrants to cities through a system called hukou. They're easing off of it, but basically this gives you a score, and then based on your score, like your ability to find stable housing and employment, they go, okay, you should live over in this city. You can imagine that not everybody really agrees with the score and the assignment that they're given. So then you end up with a lot of kind of unofficial or illegal citizens living on the outskirts of cities, kind of year over year trying to apply for permanent citizenship, not permanent residence, but permanent citizenship within their own country. And then the other really interesting thing is that happens from time to time in China and certainly in other places, is that those officials kind of prefer that the minds of their own stay in their gated compounds and keep their opinions to themselves. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that these gated compounds are sort of like mini nation states within a country. So expulsions, right? Inequality, class segmentation, financialization of everything, record land acquisition, and population management. That's not all good, and that all contributes more and more to this idea of isolation. So, soberingly, in 1985, the average North American social support network consisted of 3 people that you could turn to if you really had some problems. As of 2004, that's down to 2 people, and 50% of the people included in the survey actually only had 0 to 1 person that they could turn to. This is even more protracted of a problem in residential towers. People, paradoxically, in residential towers report feeling lonely and crowded at the same time. The elevator being a pretty common stage on which this crowding drama plays out. The effects of that, aside from clinical depression, is that social isolation is being observed in some cities to lead, or is being measured to be a substantial factor in the increase of heat wave mortality. So it's actually just really unhealthy for you. The one bright spot is that studies have suggested standing, if you're ever in an elevator, stand in front of the control panel. As if you stand in front of the control panel, you'll probably be happier. You'll feel like the elevator is bigger. You won't feel crowded. You'll feel a better sense of control. And that silver lining is the note I want to end on with a quote to guide you, a related quote to guide you into the uncertain future of the predictive city, which is program or be programmed. Choose the former and you gain access to the control panel of civilization. Choose the latter and it could be the last real choice you ever get to make. Good luck.